champion, not a champion now. But there's some other good stuff in his life, and that's why I think recognizing Martin Luther King is important. And we'll get into this a little bit, but the two big things is that he believed in nonviolence. He believed in civil disobedience, but no violence. And I believe one of the key reasons why he was murdered by our government was because he became anti-war and came out loud and clear and opposed Vietnam, which was heroic at the time. And of course, the other one that I've mentioned in the past on some of our programs was Muhammad Ali, Cassius Clay, for not wanting to go over there and kill people that had never done him any harm. So, but for the most part, the pro-war movement, the deep state was very much in charge, even back then. And of course, Martin Luther King was independent-minded. I believe that's the main thrust of how and why he got murdered.
And yet we both read an excellent article in The Intercept this morning that pointed out something really, really fascinating, which is when Martin Luther King Jr. turned against LBJ, President Johnson's foreign policy, the liberal establishment turned against him. They cited a poll. By 1966, 63% of Americans had a negative view of MLK. That was an absolute flip from a couple of years before. So his emphasizing violence overseas, in addition to violence at home, caused the establishment to flip on him.
And, you know, back then, most people had the impression, well, the liberals were against the war, and New York Times and Washington Post would be, would be sympathetic because at the end they were against the war. But they were very much against the war, and they turned against LBJ. I mean, I turned against Martin Luther King because they were pro-war. And one of their pragmatic, utilitarian, wrongfully directed arguments was, well, LBJ, we might not like this war, but we can't offend LBJ. We have to give him support because look at what he gives us. He gives us all these welfare programs, and we need more money domestically, and that may rock the boat. He won't be our friend. And there was a lot of that going on, which was ridiculous. I mean, that in a way is saying, well, let's keep the war going on. We kill a few people, we spend and waste a little money, as long as they endorse the welfare state. And that to me was obscene, and that's why the liberal establishment, plus most of the civil rights organizations, turned against him as well. So he was a very unpopular person, at the time of his death.
And he said something very bold. It's hypocritical to preach nonviolence at home and to ignore U.S. government's violence overseas. Yeah. And this, it was the April 1967 speech where he first really forcefully denounced U.S. involvement in Indochina. He was advised by his inner circle, don't bring this up, don't rock the boat. And he ignored them, and he did his own thing because he could not justify in his conscience opposing violence in one place but ignoring it somewhere else. And that was the beginning of his fallout with the establishment, really.
And, for years, everybody just said it was a single person, James Earl Ray, but there's a lot of books been written now. And I guess a major turn was when they had this trial in Memphis in 1999, when the King family was pushing this. But the King family didn't succumb to this temptation to, justify what was going on. I mean, they came on the side that the government was involved, and various branches of the government, like the FBI, the police. I don't know whether the CIA was involved, but the Army was involved. It was a true conspiracy, and it came out in this trial, and I don't think people have refuted that, and I think most people believe that we were very much involved. To say loosely, our government was involved, just as they have been involved in most of the major killings in this country, assassination of leaders.
And it was a jury of 6 blacks and 6 whites that determined that the murder of Martin Luther King was a conspiracy involving the U.S. government, and it was primarily over his anti-war, anti-Vietnam War views. So that was a very significant event, I think.
Hey, good evening, good evening. I don't have to say it. I don't have to say it. You've had enough people explain who were highly intelligent, even involved, and even the judge who explained that we have no idea who killed Martin Luther King. But we do know there were a lot of people involved, and we do know that it was closely related to the same reasons why they killed JFK. But I'm here in Indianapolis. This is, I believe this is Freedom Park, and it's a phenomenal statue of Martin Luther King reaching out to JFK. And the reason I love this statue is because it really demonstrates a lot of what we need to embrace. The people who are interested in the things that King talked about towards the end of his life, when he really started to mature and really started to figure out, how do you fix such a broke, sick system? And it was, of course, through a message of unity. And the thing that I find interesting, and the reason why I love this particular setup and this piece of art here, is because it demonstrated two people who came from very different walks of life, who came to the same understandings. Now, mind you, they weren't, I think as it was put, they weren't buddies, but they arrived in the same place. And that's the fun thing about truth. And that's what truth will do to you, is you'll find people who don't think like you, who don't look like you, who don't grow up like you, will end up arriving in a similar place together. So yes, thank you, Sister Elaine. One mind, one spirit. The same spirit is within everybody. It's not even a religious thing. It's just an understanding that we really are of one species. So I love that setup. So I appreciate anybody jumping in. This is rather a late broadcast for me, but I wanted to finish up and look at the last speech and talking about the three evils of society, right? The three things that we have to extinct. And King was very clear on these things. And so people come to you, they want to tell you how much they love Martin Luther King and they embrace this, that, and the other. And first question I always have for you: where do you stand on racism, groupism, and division of the people it takes to fix a system? Where do you stand on consumerism, the drive behind all the corporations and the wastefulness and the unsustainability that brings in the last evil, which is the militarism? And it drives the oppression needed to invade those countries and take out the things that we do on the slave labor that we do. King understood these things at such a young age, and he understood them in a time where there was no internet. They didn't have Prodigy. Y'all old folks, y'all remember Prodigy. But he figured those things out. And in the age of mass media, all this information, all this data, all these men who came before us who left the nuggets of truth. So we didn't have to do the research. And the majority still have not figured out that the only way we fix this sick system, the only thing that will turn it around in King's day, let alone today, is people lay down the swords that they have for other people. They're others. There are no others. You will drown in the same consumerism, racism, and militarism with everybody else and everybody else's child. So that was Brother Paul speaking. And I always appreciate the brother. He just always puts it out, raw truth, just how it is. You either love him or you hate him. And I love him for the fact that he always says the truth. And if a former congressman coming out and tell you that the government killed Martin Luther King, and you're still, if they can kill a president and they can kill our kings, they can take anybody out. So, but anyway, let me get down into it. Great speech. And so from earlier, I apologize. I did have to back off of that I had an important call I had to make. Like I said, it's a friend of mine lost her father, and having gone through that, you know, when people call you and the people need you, you need to always be there, right? Like that's us. We can put other stuff on hold for a little bit. We can put the stuff that we want to do on hold for other people because they're people. Because they're people, and if you've been through a similar situation, and you have something that you might think might help somebody, even if it's just a piece of information, a kind word or something, always do that. Because that's what brings us together, and that's why we're here. And that's why we don't talk politics. We don't talk politics. We don't talk taking sides and being blood-sucking ticks on society. We talk about human rights. Right? We don't have time for the other stuff. We got to push the politics aside because none of this is politics anymore. Stop being about politics. In fact, to be honest with you, it probably wasn't even about politics in King's Day. This is all about human rights. And so that's why adults need to take over this conversation. So I appreciate anybody joining on with me. It's not a short speech. It's not a short one, but I try to break it up here and there, and we'll try to get into some discussion. At least if not anything else, some commentary. And let's get going.
Mr. Chairman, friends and brothers in this first gathering of the National Conference on New Politics, ladies and gentlemen, can you hear me in the back? I don't know if the Klan is in here tonight or not with all the trouble we're having with these microphones. And seldom, if ever, we're still working with it. As I was about to say, seldom, if ever, has such a diverse and truly ecumenical gathering convened under the aegis of politics in our nation. And I want to commend the leadership of the National Conference on New Politics for all of the great work that they have done in making this significant convention possible. Indeed, by our very nature, we affirm that something new is taking place on the American political horizon. We have come here from the dusty plantations of the Deep South and the depressing ghettos of the North. We have come from the great universities and the flourishing suburbs. We have come from Appalachian poverty and from conscience-stricken wealth. But we have come. And we have come here because we shared a common concern for the moral health of our nation. We have come because our eyes have seen through the superficial glory and glitter of our society and observed the coming of judgment. Like the prophet of old, we have read the handwriting on the wall. We have seen our nation weighed in the balance of history and found wanting. We have come because we see this as a dark hour in the affairs of men. For most of us, this is a new mood. We are traditionally the idealists. We are the marchers from Mississippi and Selma and Washington who staked our lives on the American dream during the first half of this decade. Many assembled here campaigned assiduously for Lyndon Johnson in 1964 because we could not stand idly by and watch our nation contaminated by the 18th century policies of Goldwaterism. We were the hardcore activists who were willing to believe that Southerners could be reconstructed in the constitutional image. We were the dreamers of a dream, that dark yesterdays of man's inhumanity to man would soon be transformed into bright tomorrows of justice. Now it is hard to escape the disillusionment of betrayal. Our hopes have been blasted and our dreams have been shattered. The promise of a great society was shipwrecked off the coast of Asia on the dreadful peninsula of Vietnam. The poor black and white, are still perishing on a lonely island of poverty in the midst of a vast ocean of material prosperity. What happens to a dream deferred?
What happens to a dream deferred? You know, what I do always love is Dr. King always likes to make sure he's talking to everybody. He never leaves out. You know, multiple times I recall him talking about the poor whites in Appalachia, along with the poor blacks in the ghetto, along with the poor in Vietnam. He always links them together. He never lets it ride so that you're never confused who he's talking to and who he's talking about, who his family is, and who it's going to take to bring things together. Talks about common ground and the common decencies of respecting human life and human rights. He talked about Goldwater. I don't need to go into the details of that, and we don't need to talk about who was a Goldwater girl. How have we gotten here? How have we gotten to a place where some of the best options that people have to lead the free world pretty much all stand against what some of our favorites always taught? I don't want to break it up too much. There's certain things I want to highlight. This is not dissimilar from where we are today. This is precisely where we are today. We actually made a lot of progress. And we slid back in a lot of ways too. And I think we need to be honest about that. We slid back on our morals and we slid back on our ethics. I always appreciate how Dr. King, he doesn't negotiate with moral and ethical terrorists. He never really stood with a party. So if you think I'm talking about parties, I'm definitely not talking about political parties. Again, this is not politics. He didn't pick a side. He knew better than to pick a side. He understood what lying and deceit and negotiating with human rights was all about, which is where we have come to. But that it takes everybody. It took everybody to undo the system back then. And as extremely corrupt as it is today, much more evolved in the distance that it's actually come, to a point where you can kill a president and get away with it scot-free, the leader of the free world. You can kill some of the most loved people on the planet and nobody will oppose you. You know, I was blown away earlier today. I was reading the documents the FBI released, and you know what kind of blew me away was just the redaction level on them. You know, we got to this time where secrecy is completely okay. This is one of the King documents. You know, and it talks about the FBI tale, and it talks about how one of the Klan members was actually wanted to be in negotiation, and actually sounds like he got a meeting with someone from the NAACP, that King's general court, his closest people, all turned against him. how is it that we live in a time, and I know I said this with JFK, and I'm going to say it again. How is it we live in a time that a man's life can be taken or a woman's life can be taken? And those who are put in positions of power to actually prevent this from happening and to tweak things so it doesn't happen again can take a document with the data from whether it's Martin Luther King or JFK or a homeless person on the street. How do you release something like that and people don't show up in outrage? That's not justice. That's not truth. That's lies. That's deceit. And that's protecting the very people that took that man's life. So let's keep going. I don't want to go too far down that path, but this is why I say the day of secrecy has come to an end. The day of secrecy has to be all over. If we're going to move forward as a human race, can't be any more secrets. We need to know all the truth.
It leads to bewildering frustration and corroding bitterness. I came to see this in a personal experience here in Chicago last summer. And all the speaking that I have done in the United States before varied audiences, including some hostile whites, the only time that I have ever been booed was one night in our regular weekly mass meeting by some angry young men of our movement. I went home that night with an ugly feeling. Selfishly, I thought of my sufferings and sacrifices over the last 12 years. Why would they boo one so close to them? But as I lay awake thinking, I finally came to myself, and I could not for the life of me have less than patience and understanding for those young men. For 12 years, I and others like me had held out radiant promises of progress. I had preached to them about my dream. I had lectured to them about the not too distant day when they would have freedom, all here now. I had urged them to have faith in America and in white society. Their hopes had soared. They were now booing me because they felt that we were unable to deliver on our promises. They were booing because we had urged them to have faith in people who had too often proved to be unfaithful. They were now hostile because they were watching the dream that they had so readily accepted turn into a frustrating nightmare. This situation is all the more ominous in view of the rising expectations of men the world over. The deep rumblings that we hear today, the rumbling of discontent, is the thunder of disinherited masses rising from dungeons of oppression to the bright hills of freedom. All over the world, like a fever, freedom is spreading in the widest liberation movement in history. The great masses of people are determined to end the exploitation of their races and lands. And in one majestic chorus, they are singing in the words of our freedom song, "Ain't gonna let nobody turn us around." And so the collision course is set. The people cry for freedom, and the Congress attempts to legislate repression. Millions, yes, billions, are appropriated for mass murder, but the most meager pittance of foreign aid for international development is crushed in the surge of reaction. Unemployment rages at a major depression level in the black ghettos, but the bipartisan response is an anti-riot bill rather than a serious poverty program.
Pulling the carpet out from under you. Does that sound familiar? Does that mimic politics at all today? When they make a promise, you have a need, and they pull it out from under you. But when the war shows up, when the dictator needs a little assistance, the minerals, the conflict minerals and the oil doesn't have the prices that it should, it's not flowing the way that makes them happy, they always find the money. They always find the laws and the legislation. When it's time to go murder people, they always find the billions. When it's time to take a life, they got more than what they ever need. When it's time to save a life, oh, you gotta fight, you gotta protest, you gotta stand up, you gotta do anything you can just to get a nickel. And the question I ask you, is this really the system you want to hand to your children? Is this really the sick system that you're promising them or that you promised them? Is this the sick system that you want to hand to your grandchildren, where you have absolutely no control in what your government does? And it's always a lie, some hypocrisy, or a carpet that gets pulled out from underneath you every single time. And this is why I say we don't have political problems. I have zero interest in who you want to run next, because it always was the same and it always is the same. What we need is a shift in consciousness. We need a shift in government. We need to stop playing this game like we're too dumb to realize what's going on. Bipartisan.
The modest proposals for model cities, rent supplement, and rat control, pitiful as they were to begin with, get caught in the maze of congressional inaction. And I submit to you tonight that a Congress that proves to be more anti-Negro than anti-rat needs to be dismissed. It seems that our legislative assemblies have adopted Nero as their patron saint and are bent on fiddling while our cities burn. Even when the people persist and in the face of great obstacles develop indigenous leadership and self-help approaches to their problems, and finally tread the forest of bureaucracy to obtain existing government funds, the corrupt political order seeks to crush even this beginning of hope. The case of CDGM in Mississippi is the most publicized example, but it is a story repeated many times across our nation. Our own experience here in Chicago is especially painfully present. After an enthusiastic approval by HEW's Department of Adult Education, SCLC began an adult literacy project to aid 1,000 young men and women who have been pushed out of overcrowded ghetto schools in obtaining basically literacy skills prerequisite to receiving jobs. We had an agreement with A&P stores for 750 jobs through SCLC's job program. Operation Breadbasket, and had recruited over 500 pupils the first week. At that point, Congressman Kuczynski and the Daily Machine intervened and demanded that Washington cut off our funds or channel them through the machine-controlled poverty program in Chicago. Now we have no problem with administrative supervision, but we do have a desire to be independent of machine control and the Democratic Party patronage network. For this desire for a politically independent approach to the needs of our brothers, our funds are being stopped as of September 15th, and a very meaningful program discontinued. Yes, the hour is dark. Evil comes forth in the guise of good. It is a time of double talk when men in high places have a high blood pressure of deceptive rhetoric and an anemia of concrete performance. We cry out against welfare handouts to the poor, but generously approve an oil depletion allowance to make the rich richer. 6 Mississippi plantations receive more than $1 million a year, not to plant cotton, but no provision is made to feed the tenant farmer who is put out of work by the government subsidy. The crowning achievement in hypocrisy must go to those staunch Republicans and Democrats of the Midwest and West who were given land by our government when they came here as immigrants from Europe. They were given education through the land-grant colleges. They were provided with agricultural agents to keep them abreast of farming trends. They were granted low-interest loans to aid in the mechanization of their farms. And now that they have succeeded in becoming successful, they are paid not to farm. And these are the same people who now say to black people whose ancestors were brought to this country in chains and who were emancipated in 1863 without being given land to cultivate or bread to eat, that they must pull themselves up by their own bootstraps. What they truly advocate is socialism for the rich and capitalism for the poor.
Oh, that's serious, isn't it? Socialism for the rich and capitalism for the poor. Isn't that the rig? Isn't that what they do? It always is pull yourself up. Pull yourself up. You don't need a handout. You don't need no welfare. You don't need assistance. But boy, when they need assistance, they will rob the coffers, won't they? And this is not a party thing. This is bipartisan. Everything they need, all the money will be provided. And it always is. We see this in the bailouts. Nothing has changed. The only difference now is we have a little more information. That's the only thing that's changed. We do have the ability to show we have the intellect, that we're actually not this foolish, that we can learn from the past, and we do realize that we are being played. that this entire system loves socialism, loves socialism for the elites. But you, you better get your garden hoe, get that shovel, and get back to work.
I wish that I could say that this is just a passing phase in the cycle of our nation's life. Certainly times of war, times of reaction throughout the society. But I suspect that we are now experiencing the coming to the surface of a triple-pronged sickness that has been lurking within our body politic from its very beginning. That is the sickness of racism, excessive materialism, and militarism. Not only is this our nation's dilemma, it is the plague of Western civilization. As early as 1906, W.E.B. Du Bois prophesied that the problem of the 20th century will be the problem of the color line. Now, as we stand 2/3 into this crucial period of history, we know full well that racism is still that hound of hell which dogs the tracks of our civilization. Ever since the birth of our nation, white America has had a schizophrenic personality on the question of race. She has been torn between selves, a self in which she proudly professed the great principles of democracy, and a self in which she madly practiced the antithesis of democracy. This tragic duality has produced a strange indecisiveness and ambivalence toward the Negro, causing America to take a step backward simultaneously with every step forward on the question of racial justice. To be at once attracted to the Negro and repelled by him, to love and to hate him. There has never been a solid, unified, and determined thrust to make justice a reality for Afro-Americans. The step backward has a new name today. It is called the white backlash. But the white backlash is nothing new. It is the surfacing of old prejudices, hostilities, and ambivalences that have always been there. It was caused neither by the cry of black power, nor by the unfortunate recent wave of riots in our cities. The white backlash of today is rooted in the same problem that has characterized America ever since the black man landed in chains on the shores of this nation. This does not imply that all white Americans are racist. Far from it. Many white people have, through a deep moral compulsion, fought long and hard for racial justice. Nor does it mean that America has made no progress in her attempt to cure the body politic of the disease of racism, or that the dogma of racism has not been considerably modified in recent years. However, for the good of America, it is necessary to refute the idea that the dominant ideology in our country, even today, is freedom and equality, while racism is just an occasional departure from the norm on the part of a few bigoted extremists. Racism can well be that corrosive evil that will bring down the curtain on Western civilization. Arnold Toynbee has said that some 26 civilizations have risen upon the face of the earth. Almost all of them have descended into the junk heaps of destruction. The decline and fall of these civilizations, according to Toynbee, was not caused by external invasions, but by internal decay. They failed to respond creatively to the challenges impinging upon them. If America does not respond creatively to the challenge to banish racism, some future historian will have to say that a great civilization died because it lacked the soul and commitment to make justice a reality for all men.
Of course, I'm going to stop there for a moment because I know I'm going to have people. Bernie Sanders, did he put up Bernie? Yes, I did. Yes, I did. I don't take anything from people who do great things. You know, there are people who sometimes don't see any light, and then later in life they see light, the light. There are people who see the light and they go dark. But there's one thing I won't ever take from Bernie Sanders, and that is he showed up. And it's kind of like I shared a little while ago, talked about one of the fuels to the civil rights movement were the white folks who showed up, right? They were a lot of them were college kids. They were young. They were young folks, and a good friend of the family who was high up in the SNCC leadership, he talked about how they had to keep coming back to the rallies. He says, you know what? He says, we were parents. We had jobs. We had lives. We had things to do. We couldn't show up every single Sunday in Cambridge, Maryland, and march. He said, but we had no choice because he said, those darn white kids, he said they just kept coming back. They kept coming back. And I don't know if Bernie was ever in Cambridge, but anybody who stood up for me, they have my heart. I'm not a Bernie Sanders guy. I like Bernie. I liked a lot of things that Bernie had to say. But anyone who shows up for the right things, I will always give them credit for. It doesn't matter where they came from. It matters where they stood, where they stand. And so his point was that he said, you know, he said those white college kids would come show up to the marches. And he says, if we didn't show up and surround them and protect them from the biggest rocks and the sharpest bottles, they'd have killed them kids. He said there was no way we couldn't not show up for the rally. And he says we would watch them hobble on the bus, march after march after march, to go home Monday, get patched up, try to heal, and come back the very next Sunday to march again. That's why none of this is about race. Absolutely none of it. And I make sure that every time I talk about this stuff, to make sure race has nothing to do but with solar energy. This has to do with right, and it has to do with wrong. And unfortunately, the vast majority of our country is being wronged. Just like Dr. King said, from Appalachia and the poorest white communities where they can't afford bread to the poorest ghettos where they can't even afford the cheese. So we're going to keep going.
The second aspect of our afflicted society is extreme materialism. An Asian writer has portrayed our dilemma in candid terms. He says, you call your 1,000 material devices labor-saving machinery, yet you are forever busy with the multiplying of your machinery. You grow increasingly fatigued, anxious, nervous, dissatisfied. Whatever you have, you want more. And wherever you are, you want to go somewhere else. Your devices are neither time-saving nor soul-saving machinery. There are so many sharp spurs which urge you on to invent more machinery and to do more business. This tells us something about our civilization that cannot be cast aside as a prejudiced charge by an Eastern thinker who is jealous of Western prosperity. We cannot escape the indictment. This does not mean that we must turn back the clock of scientific progress. No one can overlook the wonders that science has wrought for our lives. The automobile will not abdicate in favor of the horse and buggy, of the train in favor of the stagecoach, of the tractor in favor of the hand plow, of the scientific method in favor of ignorance and superstition. But our moral lag must be redeemed. When scientific power out, we end up with guided missiles and misguided men. When we foolishly maximize the minimum and minimize the maximum, we sign the warrant for our own day of doom. It is this moral lag in our thing-oriented society that blinds us to the human realities around us and encourages us in the greed and exploitation which create the sector of poverty in the midst of wealth. Again, we have deluded ourselves into believing the myth that capitalism grew and prospered out of the Protestant ethic of hard work and sacrifice. The fact is that capitalism was built on the exploitation and suffering of black slaves. And continues to thrive on the exploitation of the poor, both black and white, both here and abroad.
Exploitation of the poor, both black and white. Here we go. You just keep hitting it. Keep hitting it. He keeps driving the points home. And I think Brother Martin was asking, what video is this? This is, and I'll post the link to it if you want to go back and watch it and share it without my ugly mug. I'm good with that. It's about the message. Definitely it's not about me. The name of the speech was The Three Evils of Society, brother. And what they're talking about is he's talking about the three evils of racism, in which I group up as groupism. And the reason I do that is because racism's division then is serving what groupism's division is doing now. So whether it's conservative, it's left, it's right, it's liberal, it's in any of these religions and races and silly things that get people dividing, there's a message here, right? His first point is don't divide. When you divide, it makes you weak. It makes our society weak. It means that you don't get the right to tell your government what it does. That was evil one. Evil two is consumerism. That's what he's talking about now. So the funding of what takes the power of our government to even control itself in mandating the bailout of banks and capitalism for the poor, while the wealthy get all of our socialism. And the last was militarism, which he keeps going back to. And of course, I posted the picture of the Moab. We're all supposed to love that, right? And there's the F-35 right there. The millions and millions and millions we spend. And his consistent and constant and standard message of going back to the poor of all races, which is why I always link the two. Anytime you start talking about Dr. King and the civil rights movement, people say, oh, well, that was for somebody. No, it's not for somebody. Well, that was for us. No, it's not. This was all about the Constitution, civil rights, and freedom of people and equality. that has been completely corrupted, co-opted, and turned into something else, which is what happens to every movement towards the end of it. It stops being about equality and it starts being about a use of force over another group of people, which is how we got here in the first place, in using force over a different group of people. So anyway, we're going to keep going.
If Negroes and poor whites do not participate in the free flow of wealth within our economy, they will forever be poor, giving their energy, their talents, and their limited funds to the consumer market, but reaping few benefits and services in return. The way to end poverty is to end the exploitation of the poor, ensure them a fair share of the government services and the nation's resources. I proposed recently that a national agency be established to provide employment for everyone needing it. Nothing is more socially inexcusable than unemployment in this age. In the 30s, when the nation was bankrupt, it instituted such an agency, the WPA. In the present conditions of a nation glutted with resources, it is barbarous to condemn people desiring work to soul-sapping inactivity and poverty. And I am convinced that even this one massive act of concern would do more than all the state police and armies of the nation to quell riots and still hatreds. The tragedy is that our materialistic culture does not possess the statesmanship necessary to do it. Victor Hugo could have been thinking of 20th century America when he wrote, "There's always more misery among the lower classes than there is humanity in the higher classes." The time has come for America to face the inevitable choice between materialism and humanism. We must devote at least as much to our children's education and the health of the poor as we do to the care of our automobiles and the building of beautiful, impressive hotels. We must also realize that the problems of racial injustice and economic injustice cannot be solved without a radical redistribution of political and economic power. We must further recognize that the ghetto is a domestic colony. Black people must develop programs that will aid in the transfer of power and wealth into the hands of residents of the ghetto so that they may in reality control their own destinies. This is the meaning of new politics. People of goodwill in the larger community must support the black man in this effort. The final phase of our national sickness is the disease of militarism. Nothing more clearly demonstrates our nation's abuse of military power than our tragic adventure in Vietnam. Between continents and worse still, between races, it has frustrated our development of at home, telling our own underprivileged citizens that we place insatiable military demands above their most critical needs. It has greatly contributed to the forces of reaction in America and strengthened the military-industrial complex. And it has practically destroyed Vietnam and left thousands of American and Vietnamese youth maimed and mutilated, and expose the whole world to the risk of nuclear warfare. Above all, the war in Vietnam has revealed what Senator Fulbright calls our nation's arrogance of power. We are arrogant in professing to be concerned about the freedom of foreign nations while not setting our own house in order. Many of our senators and congressmen vote joyously to appropriate billions of dollars for...
Now, you know I got to stop on that one. Oh, Lord, yes, have mercy. Oh, my goodness. Nothing has changed. Nothing has changed. And if you follow me, how we were talking about a few weeks ago, how there are over 1 million United States veterans in prison. How did they get there? How did they get there? Well, you know, I suspect it has a lot to do with the fact that when somebody comes home from a war, whether the war was on truth or if it was a complete, total lie, and you don't take care of them, and they come home to a bad economy and they end up on the street, I suspect they'll end up in living conditions unlike the people who they were there, unfortunately, pitted against. Nothing has changed. We have no love of the boys and the girls we send to war. We have no love of them coming home, and we have no love of the people who we war upon. This is why we need a paradigm shift. This is why we need to reboot and reset and listen to the wisdom of people who came before us. Yeah, they killed them. But whether the dream dies or not, that's completely up to us. Completely up to us.
We arm Negro soldiers to kill on foreign battlefields, but offer little protection for their relatives from beatings and killings in our own South. We are willing to make the Negro 100% of a citizen in warfare, but reduce him to 50% of a citizen on American soil. No war in our nation's history has ever been so violative of our conscience, our national interests, and so destructive of our moral standing before the world. No enemy has ever been able to cause such damage to us as we inflict upon ourselves. The inexorable decay of our urban centers has flared into terrifying domestic conflict as the pursuit of foreign war absorbs our wealth and energy. Squalor and poverty scar our cities as our military might destroys cities in a far-off land to support oligarchy to intervene in domestic conflict. The president who cherishes consensus for peace has intensified the war. In answer to a cry to stop the war, it has brought tauntingly to 1 minute's flying time from China, to a moment before the midnight of war.
I'm going to stop there for a second, too. You notice every time that King mentions the Vietnam War, whoa, in the crowd. The clapping stops, and you start hearing people, whoa. You know what that's about, don't you? You figured out, haven't you, that all sides in this, they all love war. They all study war. And this was part of what brought about the decisions among the people who were closest to him and the people who hated him most to treat him as though Julius Caesar, because there was a willingness to trade the lives of millions of people in Vietnam for social programs at home. And I'm going to ask you, is that not where we still are today? Where people are willing to trade the lives of people they never met, their children, their mothers, their grandmothers, those who get sold into slavery, those who get buried under rubble, whether it be in Yemen or Iran or Iraq, Afghanistan, Congo. The list is long and full of insanity. The idea that you would prioritize what you want over the lives that other people need. I just wanted to point that out. And also how he begun the speech where he explained there was only one time that he recalls being booed, and it was not by a crowd that he'd expect. It was by a crowd that he'd never expect would boo him. Be very careful with those that you would ally with and think they're on the same ethical, moral, or even religious grounds as you. But I wanted to point that out. Listen to the crowd, because you can tell the dissension is already starting to sink in when he actually starts talking about what will actually fix what's wrong with this sick world. The breakdown in consumerism, racism, groupism, and militarism. Don't be confused. That part hasn't changed. They still love all three.
World conflagration. We are offered a tax for war instead of a plan for peace. Men of reason should no longer debate the merits of war or means of financing war. They should end the war and restore sanity and humanity to American policy. And if the will of the people continues to be unheeded, all men of goodwill must create a situation in which the 1967-68 elections are made a referendum on the war. The American people must have an opportunity to vote into oblivion those who cannot detach themselves from militarism, and those who lead us. And so we are here because we believe, we hope, we pray that something new might emerge in the political life of this nation, which will produce a new man, new structures and institutions, and a new life for mankind. I am convinced that this new life will not emerge until our nation undergoes a radical revolution of values. When machines and computers, profit motives and property rights are considered more important than people, the giant triplets of racism, economic exploitation, and militarism are incapable of being conquered. A civilization can flounder as readily in the face of moral bankruptcy as it can through financial bankruptcy. A true revolution of values will soon cause us to question the fairness and justice of many of our past and present policies. We are called to play the Good Samaritans on life's roadside, but that will only be an initial act. One day the whole Jericho road must be transformed so that men and women will not be beaten and robbed as they make their journey through life. True compassion is more than flinging a coin to a beggar. It understands that an edifice which produces beggars needs restructuring.
It's not merely just casting coins at a beggar, but it's understanding that a system that produces beggars has to be transformed. Think about that. And this is where we get into this whole left versus right thing, where they all got little bits and pieces of the dream, but they all seem to miss the point. Yes, you must give a man a fish. You must give a woman a fish, because if they starve in the street, if they starve in the trailer park, you can't help them. But you also have to empower them so that they know how to fish, which is why this is a screw from both sides to the poor. And then, it's not over then. Then you have to figure out what is so sick, deranged, wrong, and screwed up with the way our system works that you would have anybody living the way they do in the impoverished areas in Appalachia or the impoverished areas in Chicago. Our system is sick. Our system is inhuman. Our system is completely devoid of any resemblance of love. And it was designed. It's not an accident. Accidents you fix. If you spill milk on the floor, you clean it up. There's a reason why bipartisan, none of this is being fixed. None of it's being changed. They talk, but they will not walk any of it because they don't believe in the dream. They believe in themselves, and they're not even making their own decisions. Did you hear Dr. King talking about the oligarchy? I was blown away. I was like, oh my God. I had, and this is a word that's new to me. We didn't get this in civics class. We didn't get this in American history or world history. The word oligarchy only crossed my desk within the last 10 years. And this brother knew about it 50 years ago. The oligarchy. He put everything right out in front of our faces, from conflict minerals to poverty. And this is why they killed him. He called them the triplet sisters. Racism, groupism, militarism, and consumerism. The three ugly sisters, which is wrong. They could be the three brothers to triplets. I'm fine with that too. But the point is, they're inseparable. If you support one, you love all of them. If you get one, you get all of them. There is no attacking one little chunking piece of it. You got to take down all three. And this is why your political parties fail at pretty much everything they talk about doing, because there is no interest in ending any of this. This is designed by the people who write their paychecks, which is why you have no listening of anything from leadership down, which is why the solutions that people hand them need to go from grassroots up. You need to start telling, if you still believe in these things, you still believe in these politician things. I don't know. I'm kind of in a little bit of different school of knowledge today. I don't believe in Santa Claus and not real much of a believer in the Easter Bunny. I think Bigfoot might be real, Loch Ness. It's a possibility. People seen them. But have you seen a politician that actually listens to an American? Have you? All right, we're going to keep moving.
A true revolution of values will soon look uneasily on the glaring contrast of poverty and wealth. With righteous indignation, it will look at thousands of working people displaced from their jobs with reduced income as a result of automation, while the profits of the employers remain intact, and say this is not just. It will look across the oceans and see individual capitalists of the West investing huge sums of money in Asia and Africa, only to take the profits out with no concern for the social betterment of the countries and say this is not just. It will look at our alliance with the landed gentry of Latin America and say this is not just. A true revolution of values will lay hands on the world order and say of war, this way of settling differences is not just. This business of burning human beings with napalm, of filling our nation's homes with orphans and widows, of injecting poisonous drugs of hate into the veins of peoples normally humane, of sending men home from dark and bloody battlefields physically handicapped and psychologically deranged, cannot be reconciled with wisdom, justice, and love. A nation that continues year after year to spend more money on military defense than on programs of social uplift is approaching spiritual death. So what we must all see is that these are revolutionary times. All over the globe, men are revolting against old systems of exploitation, and out of the wounds of a frail world, new systems of justice and equality are being born. The shirtless and barefoot people of the earth are rising up as never before. The people who sat in darkness have seen a great light. We in the West must support these revolutions. It is a sad fact that because of comfort, complacency, a morbid fear of communism, and our proneness to adjust to injustice, the Western nations that initiated so much of the revolutionary spirit of the modern world have now become the arch anti-revolutionaries. This has driven many to feel that only Marxism has the revolutionary spirit. Communism is a judgment. And in a sense, communism is a judgment of our failure to make democracy real and to follow through on the revolutions that we initiated. Our only hope today lies in our ability to recapture the revolutionary spirit and go out into a sometimes hostile world, declaring eternal opposition to poverty, racism, and militarism. With this powerful commitment, we shall boldly challenge the status quo and unjust mores, and thereby speed the day when every valley shall be exalted, and every mountain and hill shall be made low, and the crooked places shall be made straight, and the rough places plain. May I say in conclusion that is a need now more than ever before for men and women in our nation to be creatively maladjusted. As Mr. Davis said, and I say to you that I choose to be among the maladjusted. As my good friend Bill Coffin said, there are those who have criticized me and many of you for taking a stand against the war in Vietnam and for seeking to say to the nation that the issues of civil rights cannot be separated from the issues of peace. I want to say to you tonight that I intend to keep these issues mixed because they are mixed. Somewhere we must see that justice is indivisible. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. And I have fought now too long and too hard against segregated public accommodations to end up at this point in my life segregating my moral concern. So let us stand in this convention knowing that on some positions, Howard has asked the question, is it safe? Expediency asks the question, is it politic? Vanity asks the question, is it popular? But conscience asks the question, is it right? And on some positions, it is necessary for the moral individual to take a stand that is neither safe, nor politic, nor popular, but he must do it because it is right. And we say to our nation tonight, we say to our government, we even say to our FBI, we will not be harassed. We will not make a butchery of our conscience. We will not be intimidated, and we will be heard.
So, you know, I'm going to ask you to think about what you take from that. And what kind of began this is every year is the same for me. Every year is the same. We come up to Martin Luther King's Day, and I have to sit back and watch people who have zero interest in Martin Luther King, zero interest in what he stood for. And I just debate whether or not they actually have watched one of his speeches, right? I'm sure most people, they get clips of speeches, you know, and they kind of vaguely remember King. But the thing that really stood out to me, because I'd rather listen to the speeches and try to do some analysis and think about where we are today and how the heck do we get out of here, as opposed to listen to a politician standing on stage lying about their profession of love for what King stood for. And I admit and I accept that, you know, it doesn't mean that they didn't love Dr. King. A lot of people love him for what he did. But more of us need to know what he stood for. Because just as in the crowd, he got booed when he spoke about not murdering children all over Vietnam, sometimes we need to boo our favorite politicians too. If you know, I think it was a Sister Sandra who just said, I'm gonna look at the comments real quick. I'll go through the comments and then I'm gonna let y'all go. But Sister Sandra just said, she said, you know, the meat of his message escapes the masses, and it does. And that's the problem. and it escapes the masses because we don't talk about it. We don't profess it. We don't stop and pull people up and say, oh, you join this party and y'all, you're going to change the world. And that's what they like to say. We're going to progress, We're going to reinstill the Constitution and states' rights. And they're all just lying like you wouldn't believe. Because, there is one thing, the right and the left, they have a lot of things right, y'all. I don't want to say they don't, because the right understands that the Constitution is important. They understand that there is no civil rights and that you need to have this. They fail in practice, right? The leadership, not the people who stand behind them, but the leadership always fails in practice. And they always roll out and promote more of the police state, just like the left does. And the left, they got a good understanding of the fact that you don't leave people on the side of the road. You have to employ love. You need social programs to help people lift up. Now, they get a little selective in who they want to help, and we can fix that. However, they fail in their approach. Never comes to fruition, or it always comes out with a little bit of screw to somebody else. It's a little slap in the face to people who they care a little less about. And so it always comes full circle. So the reason that people don't know who Dr. King was or what he stood for is because they tend to look at his earlier speeches earlier in life, and they really don't look at his message when he became largely unpopular in both groups, liberal and conservative, which is part of why Dr. King never chose a party. He never said, I'm with your group. He understood what politics is all about. It's all about division, keeping you stupid, taking your rights and your power. He sought to empower people, promote rights, and not be stupid. So, Sister Jeannie asked, who is our Martin Luther King today? Sister, we don't have one, and we don't need one. No, girl, we don't need one, because the problem is they're going to kill him, or they're going to kill her. I think we've learned this lesson the hard way. We can't have any big prominent leaders. We need to have a lot of small people who know what they're talking about. This isn't a time to sit back and praise a leader. This is a time for individual people to start standing up and speaking what's right. If you have enough people standing up and talking to the powerful message of rehabilitating our system from the bottom up, I think, as he put it, not unemploying, but removing politicians who don't seem to get it. And if you don't get, what's really needing to be changed in this society, then nothing will change. And I think those three key concepts are everything. Because not only did Eisenhower say it, but JFK said it too. Gandhi spoke on most of them as well. And so we have this problem all over the world, but it persists because we have a little too much cowardice in us. We're a little afraid of, I might lose my job. I'm not sure what people will think who are in my clique or my club. And we have to get past that. Yes, Sister Grace, I loved his quote when he said, guided missiles and misguided men. Earth-shattering, earth-shattering. When you listen to his speeches, I find that the best things that he said, they never make it into memes. The delicious stuff that really breaks down the narratives of division and really could empower people. I don't find those. I got to make my own. And I'm sorry, I do my best to not mess up the spelling. I'm not a great speller. I'm not a great speller at all. So this is how I spend my day, though. This is how my Martin Luther King day. And I spend time with JFK, and I just listen to their speeches. I listen to people a lot smarter than I am who spent a lot of time figuring out really what's wrong. And as they figure out what's wrong, they get murdered by both sides. Did I say that loud enough? They get murdered by all sides because the sides don't want to change. They need to keep things the way they are so the money keeps rolling. Yes, Sister Kimberly, and I hear you. And this is why I take the positions that I do. Kimberly said, yes, I am a poor white. And there are a lot of poor white brothers and sisters out there, not just in America, but all over the world. Why we have to stop talking about who is more poor and the fact that nobody should be. You know, the part in the speech where he talked about, you know, the white and the black soldier in a impoverished country on the beaches, on the island, looking at an abundant sea. We live in a world of abundance, ignorant abundance. And there's more than enough to go around. And that's why we have to stop with this division about race. Stop with who has more in prison. Stop with who has more trouble with the police. Stop with who doesn't have this or that. Because what all that is about, it's about division in the solution. Because if they can say this group is worse off, then they can give that group more, which is going to piss off the other group more. How is it completely illogical? Because there's not a person in this country that has a set, specific path of poverty that's based on their skin color. It doesn't exist. You're always going to get it wrong. Poverty is about a birth lottery. The stork drops you off in a place and you pay for it the rest of your life. And what I won't do, Sister Kimberly, I have a lot of poor white friends, and I will not turn my back on them. I have a lot of poor black friends. I will not turn my back on them. I have a lot of poor Asian friends. I will not turn. I have a lot of poor Hispanic friends. I will not. And there's poor people in all of these countries where we're pumping minerals out, and I will not turn my back on them. And I'm going to ask you not to do the same either. Because not because I say so, but because men a lot smarter than I am, and women have said this all throughout time. Let me see what else we got here. Poverty has no class, happens to all humans. Yes, it does. It absolutely does. And so we can't turn our back on any of them, Sister Jeannie. Absolutely. Choice between materialism and humanism. And it's a simple choice, Grace. I think people who have their thinking caps on, it's a simple choice. You know, we buy too much crap. We waste too much crap. It's one thing we posted earlier today. 99% of everything bought within 6 months is tossed out. Completely unacceptable. Completely unacceptable. I know Martin Luther King, and I understand Martin Luther King, and I love the dream, support the dream, but I'm going to go get the new iPhone as soon as it comes out. Thank you, Darby. Certainly appreciate it. Love you too. How have we not embodied this yet? Jasmine asked. I have to defer to King. It's division, right? That's how we haven't embodied it. People are still dividing over really ignorant ideas. Brother Jimmy's talking about industrial military complex through today, as the world is at war and the impoverished are being led to hidden doom with their profit. Yes, they are, which is why we're not doing politics. This is about human rights, which means the people who are still cheering their parties, cheering war, cheering racism, cheering consumerism, all the same thing, because they use all of those mechanisms to keep everything going, no matter what they tell you. When you wear that button on your shirt, that is what they stand for, because that is all they have ever done. Then we must hold them up ourselves. Yes, we do. This is definitely a revolution of compassion. It's a peaceful one. It's one that we need to start standing up for our morals and ethics and the things that we actually believe in, and stop negotiating with the people rolling out what's anti to what we all believe in and what we all need and what our next generations need. It's just a massive vote of no confidence in the people who lead our world. His words apply to today. We must evolve in truth, peace, and life. Yes, we must, Sandra. And if we don't, I think we have a chance, sister, to do it peacefully. Not sure the next generation is going to have that chance. It was a JFK who said that those who deny a peaceful revolution will have to suffer a violent one. Very true. They're very true words. And which is why both parties are completely happy to roll out the police state. No matter what they tell you, they take your rights, they roll out more Patriot Acts, and they're constantly preparing for this inevitable of what they feel is going to be a violent revolution, because they know that they're not backing down. They're not going to be down. They can be forced down, but they don't think that you're smart enough to stop dividing and force them to back down, because that's the only thing that can back all this. If it took everyone to unite in King's Day, which is what he tried to do to back the system down, it's going to take everybody plus two to do it today. So people are not willing. People are sheep. Look at the Queen. Yeah, Darby. And I agree. They are. They are sheep. But, you know, sheep, some sheep have horns. Some sheep can grow horns. Sometimes sheep don't realize how powerful they are, how big the herd is, which is why I think a lot of us are actually talking more and more about it, because you can give a sheep some horns, you know, but you got to give it a chance. You know, we have to be careful with some of the names that we give people, because, you know, we want to give them a chance to come home. And that was the speech from earlier this morning in part one, was Dr. King at the end. He said, America, come home. Come home. We can't ever burn bridges with people, so we have to be careful. We always got to give them a chance to come home. And if there's no other time in America where people need to come home to morals, to ethics, to love, to compassion, to come home from just thinking about themselves all the time or their little group, now is the time to come home. So I think we have to be very careful with the words, because that's what those groups do in getting people to divide. They come up with some heinous names, some derogatory names to evoke emotion and get an emotional response out of them, as opposed to an intelligent one. And so, and I'm definitely guilty. So it's definitely not about you, Darby. I'm definitely guilty. We all go down that path. And I'm thinking sheep probably isn't a good word to use. I think I personally, I think I'm going to have to stop using that word. We got to evolve. We have to upgrade. We're like a Windows operating system. None of us are perfect. None of us got it. We got to continue to upgrade to get better and better, because it's not about us. It's about the next generation. So sick. We all suffer because we don't see we are one. We all suffer, but you know, Jasmine, we're on the boat together, and I think that's how the world works and how it's supposed to work. We have to figure it out, and if we don't figure it out, we really don't deserve to be here. I imagine. Brother Mark said, "I often think, what would this country look like by now with him? We all know what it looks like without him." I do. I wonder that too, Mark. And, you know, I'll be honest, I don't wonder it as much, because it makes me angry. I don't like to be angry. I'm kind of like Incredible Hulk in that way. I don't want to be angry, because I know when I'm angry, nothing positive comes out. And when I think about the fact that they took JFK from us, they took Martin Luther King from us, they took our greats, and they laugh about it. They hide it. They snicker and they redact it so we can't see it. It can take me to places I don't want to be. So I try not to think about it, and I try to stay positive and just think about, we need to move forward. We need to keep moving forward. They killed him, and there's nothing we can do about it except for pick up the reasons why they killed him. King died, the baton dropped, they left it on the floor, and they walked away. Kennedy died, the baton dropped, They left it on the floor and walked away. And I think, hopefully, we are finally a generation who will pick the baton up where they left off, not start over from scratch, punch a Nazi and some of these silly, stupid ideas people come up with hate, fighting hate with hate, and take a different path. Restore sanity in American policy, yes, and that's what we need to do. We need to take the insanity out, which is what it is. It's insanity where we're at. Revolution of values, yes, we need a revolution. We got to go back to who we are and what we are. We are not these ignorant creatures that we act like today. We believe, we hope, we pray that something new might emerge, a true revolution of values, question our past and present and policies. Grace, I think we're there. I think we're at, I don't think we're there. I think the pump is primed for change, real change. And why I say that? Because Americans have become so desperate, they'll put anyone in office. To me, how the elections have been going, the last couple of elections, I suspect that Americans, they don't necessarily have the answers, but the angst is there, the understanding that we are in sick times and we need to change. That is there. And I think we're there. We just we haven't connected the dots yet, and we need to connect the dots. And that's looking back in history at those who saw this coming and pick the baton up from that point. When you give, do not give for yourself to feel good. You give to give. And that's who we are, Jeannie. You know, we have to give because it's giving. We don't give because someone else earned it or we think they earned it, because that's what humans are. And that's how we populated the whole earth, in giving and caring for each other, caring for our neighbors. You know, most of our grandparents, they didn't let their neighbors starve. Today, people don't even know their neighbors. And that's got to come to an end. All right. Yes, the whole damn human family. Yes, Jeannie, we are one big family worldwide. And personally, I'm done with people killing my cousins. I've had it. I've had it with people killing my cousins in Palestine. I've had it with people killing my cousins in Israel. I've had it with people killing my cousins in Iraq. I've had it with people killing my cousins in Iran. I've had it with people killing my cousins on ranches in mid-America. I've had it with people killing my cousins in the inner cities. I've had it with people killing my cousins all over Africa. I've had it with people killing my cousins in South America. I've had it with people killing my cousins in places I don't even know my cousins are getting killed, because I don't know which one of my cousins is going to be the next Nikola Tesla, the next Martin Luther King, the next JFK, the next person that takes us into a paradigm shift into the future. So I'm done with murder and death. I'm not studying war no more. I'm done with it. And if your group does, I'm done with you too. And that's how I feel we need to be. All right, you guys. I appreciate you guys joining late. It is a late one. Let me just read the last couple comments, and I am going to go. Christine said, brother, you're right, Christine said, no, they don't love Dr. King, not at all. When he started talking about reparation, they murdered him. They don't love him. They don't love him. And reparations, brother, is a good word. I love it. People don't get bent out of shape on the word reparations. Don't. When people mention reparations, all you got to do is ask, are you talking reparations from this sick system that abused 99% of everybody in different ways? Or are you talking reparations for a selective group for selective abuse? That's the only question you got to ask. Because when you start talking about all the people that this destroyed, that this reduced, the people who were cheated out of land, the people who were brought here as slaves, the people who were treated as slaves on the railroad, the people who were murdered, thrown in a ditch, and all the ancestors of all those, the 99% who fell victim and prey to the 1%, I have no interest in who is treated worse. My interest is, if you were treated wrong, your human rights were taken, your ability to survive was taken, you were pushed, your family was pushed down into this place of poverty, and maybe some of y'all built yourselves back up and a lot didn't, then I'm not worried about the word reparations, but they are. They don't want you talking about that. They don't want you coming for what's yours on a planet full of abundance, full of things, full of food and water and enough to go around, but they don't want it to go around. They're greedy and they need it for themselves because they're psychopaths. But that's a different conversation. Dr. King wasn't a politician. He was a spiritual man who spoke truth to power. Yes, he was Buddha. That is who he is. And I think that's who we need to be if we truly love him and respect him anyway. Basic needs can be met for all. Yes, Jasmine, they can. And it's a very easy thing to do. And even Dr. King was even talking about automation. Did y'all hear that? He was even talking about automation. Even in their day, automation was coming for him. You know, the world didn't end. But of course, they didn't direct that automation to help people. And so that's why we are here today. He also was talking about some injections. I have to go back and pay a little more attention to the injection part. You know how I am with the medical industry. So just a deep brother with just amazing insight. Yeah, and he talked about capitalism. And of course, he didn't hate capitalism. Capitalism had to be put in its box, right? You know, so this isn't an anti, and the right believes in capitalism. It's not against capitalism. It's just capitalism can't come in the way of basic human survival, whether it's for people in Appalachia or people in the ghettos. Capitalism is above and beyond basic needs of what people need. And it's not welfare. It's a bad name, welfare. It's just empowering people, and it's just loving people. Why do I want everybody to have food, a house, a car, water, and a life? Because they're human freaking beings. That's why. They're born on this planet. Their ancestors on all continents developed all the technology that we all have now, that people lie with patents and try to think that it's theirs. And so all that technology is for them. If all that technology can produce their water, build their houses, give them a car and a life, the bare needs, food for survival, who am I to deny that from them? Do you know how arrogant that sounds, that I think that the 1% should keep all of this and all those patents, but it was developed on the ancestral heritage of 7 billion people? Do you know how insane that sounds? I think sometimes you should look in the mirror and say some of the things that these politicians say and just really ask yourself, should you be in a straitjacket? So I know I should have been, because I bought into the whole system. So I'm not hitting you with anything. I bought into the whole hook, line, and sinker. So I'm no guru of anything. I know that we have to move forward. Yes, Emily, we have to move forward, and things got to change. This has got to come to an end. So, well, listen, you know what? I really appreciate y'all joining in. It was a long one. It's a long day. It was a long speech. But I want to make sure that everybody really is paying attention to the message he had. And I think that was one of the most important speeches in specifically identifying the 3 ills in society that we need to go extinct so we can move forward. And people miss that a lot. They talk about Martin Luther King till they're blue in the face. They even manufacture some tears. And some of the tears are real. Some people really, really love them, but they don't really know the final messages that could have changed the world, changed our country, which is what got him killed. The division has to stop. Consumerism is going to have to slow the hell down, if not stop completely. We got to go back to being sustainable. We got to stop funneling all the power to the most evil people on this planet. And the militarism, the idea that murdering somebody you disagree with, the solutioning that all of our leaders always roll out because they're not I don't want to say that they're not intelligent enough, but maybe they're not allowed to not make a violent solution, that they don't have the ability, for whatever reason, to make the same decisions we make in corporate America every single day. When we disagree with someone, when we disagree with our neighbor, we don't go murder them. So we shouldn't be murdering people in the Congo. We shouldn't be murdering people in Colombia. We shouldn't be murdering people in all the countries we do. And we damn sure shouldn't be murdering people in America. But anyway, listen, love y'all. Thank you for taking time to join and hang out and talk about Dr. King. Please keep in mind that when they say keep the dream alive, make sure you remind people what the dream actually was. Love y'all to death. Y'all have a great night.